All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to deconstruct a really unique cognitive profile, taking it apart layer by fascinating layer, just to see how it all ticks.
You know, we all have friends or colleagues who just see the world differently, right? But what if you could actually map their entire thought process? I mean, right down to a single equation. Well, that's exactly what we're going to try to do. We're going to build this blueprint from the ground up, starting with simple observations and taking it all the way to a formal model. And trust me, the journey is pretty incredible.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the first layer. We're looking at 4 core characteristics that really define this particular way of thinking. And these were pieced together just from watching behaviors and, direct instructions.
So what you're looking at here is a really powerful mix. This isn't just one thing, it's a combination. You've got this deep need to take ideas apart, to really see if they hold up. Then there's this love for organizing everything into structured, data-driven frameworks. Add to that an ability to see complexity from all sides, and top it all off with this constant drive to build totally new things from that understanding.
And here's the thing, these traits, they aren't just a random list. They actually form a 4-stage process. It's like a cognitive loop. It starts with breaking things down. Then you organize all the pieces. Then you integrate them with other viewpoints. And finally, you use all that deep knowledge to build something brand new. So it's this cycle, right? Rigorous critique followed by creative construction.
Okay, so that's the informal observation, right? That's what we see on the surface. But what happens when you run this profile through a formal data-driven professional assessment? Does the theory actually match the data?
Well, it turns out the match is almost perfect. A really well-known leadership report, it's called Business Chemistry, it identifies this person as a driver guardian. Now, the report calls this style analytical structural. The labels are a little different, sure, but the core idea, it's exactly the same.
And here's exactly how that connection breaks down. That analytical trait we talked about, it maps perfectly to the driver, who's all about logic and facts. The systematic trait, that's the guardian, who is super methodical and detail-oriented. And the other traits, they kind of emerge from how these two patterns blend and interact with each other. It's just a direct, data-driven validation of that initial portrait we sketched out.
But here's the real kicker. The single most dominant feature, by far, is an overwhelming 96th percentile score as a scientist subtype. So what does that mean? It means this is someone who is fundamentally driven by a deep curiosity, a need to test every idea, and this desire to find patterns inside incredibly complex systems. This isn't just about being analytical. It's a fundamental need to understand how things work from the inside out.
But the report goes even deeper than just these labels. It starts to reveal some really surprising nuances, these internal dynamics that add a whole new layer of understanding to this cognitive map.
So for example, how does a risk-averse guardian and a goal-focused driver handle risk? You'd think they'd conflict, right? But no. Instead, they use this really sophisticated 2-stage process. First, the guardian side steps in and demands an overwhelming amount of data and a super detailed plan. But once that risk is quantified and it makes logical sense, the driver takes over completely, pursuing that goal with total, absolute focus. It's this wild blend of extreme caution followed by incredibly decisive action.
And this also explains something you might notice if you met this person, a potential perception gap. The report calls it a quiet driver persona. You've got that intense, competitive, analytical drive, but it's all filtered through the reserved, questioning demeanor of the scientist. So what might look like quiet caution on the outside is actually masking this intense internal engine of analysis and debate.
And then there's this, which is maybe the most fascinating anomaly of all. Despite a really low score for group-oriented, consensus-driven thinking, we're talking just 19%, there's a remarkably high score for the dreamer subtype. And that sounds like a contradiction, right? But it's not. It just means that while the motivation isn't coming from external agreement, it's coming from a powerful, inwardly focused, and intrinsically motivated sense of purpose. It's like the hidden why that fuels the entire engine.
Okay, so let's move to the deepest layer of all. We're going to see how this entire cognitive process, the traits, the professional profile, all those hidden depths can be formalized into a single, elegant model.
And this is where it gets wild. Amazingly, we can actually represent this whole complex web of traits with a formal mathematical model of cognition. I know it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but it provides a stunningly accurate blueprint.
And here it is, the Integrated Cognition Engine, or the ICE model.
Now, I know this formula looks incredibly complex, and we're not going to break down every single variable. But the core idea is actually pretty simple. It describes how we balance two systems of thought. On one side, you have our fast, intuitive, pattern-matching mind, and on the other, our slow, deliberate, analytical mind. So this whole equation, it's just a formal way of describing the tug-of-war between them. We're going to focus on two key variables that basically act as the master controls for this entire engine.
Okay, first up, right at the heart of the model, you've got delta, the deliberation coefficient. The easiest way to think of this is as the master switch. It controls how much weight you give to a quick gut feeling versus deep, analytical thinking. And for the person we're mapping, this dial is almost always cranked way over towards analysis. It's the mechanism that powers that deconstructive, systematic approach we saw earlier.
Next up is beta, the bias mitigation factor. This one is like your internal fact checker. It represents the power of your logical mind to challenge your own assumptions and override any flawed initial judgments. It's the self-correcting mechanism that makes sure the data-driven guardian wins out over some unverified hunch.
So here's the crucial point. This specific thinking style is really just the version of the ICE model that is consistently tuned for maximum analytical rigor. That dial for delta, it's turned way up, always favoring deliberate analysis. And the beta factor is also maxed out, constantly challenging those initial assumptions. So for this person, intuition isn't treated as an answer, it's treated as the very first hypothesis that must be rigorously tested.
And that brings us to the final, and honestly, the most profound layer of this whole story. Because the connection between this person and this model, it's a lot deeper than you might think.
So here's the twist. The person whose mind we've been mapping this whole time, they actually helped build the framework we're using to map it. Yeah, they weren't just a subject being analyzed by the integrated cognition engine, they were one of its architects.
And this reveals something pretty extraordinary. The model isn't just a good fit, it is a direct mathematical reflection of the subject's own cognitive architecture, which they helped codify into a formal system. The whole process of building the model was, in a way, an act of self-description.
And this changes everything. The subject isn't just an analytical thinker. They're what you might call a systems builder. Their ultimate drive isn't just to understand things, but to create the very systems, the frameworks, the conceptual tools that are needed to generate that understanding in the first place.
You know, it all makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you could step back and map your own cognitive engine, the way you process the world, make decisions, and create ideas, what variables would define it? What would the formula for your thinking look like?